Before I wrote Melody, I was a copywriter in advertising, and had absolutely no ambitions to do anything other than being a copywriter. But it was just chance that the same agency where I worked also was Charles Saatchi and David Putnam, and they had just left the agency, and they called me up one day and they said to me, would you like to have lunch? We had lunch, I remember, in this Greek restaurant in Soho, and they said, we're going to go into the film business, and today we're going to discover you, which I always thought was really funny that they should be discovering me. I thought, well, no one knows who they are at that time. I should be discovering them. But I wrote a screenplay, Charles wrote a script, and someone else did, and then the idea was for David Putnam to go to the States and try and raise the money for it. And my first effort was quite awful and very depressing. It was based on Beatles song Eleanor Rigby, and then I wrote Melody because Putnam had bought the rights to 7 Bee Gees songs, and that was the genesis of everything. So David said to me, what a good idea it would be if you wrote a love story with concerning children, and also I've got the rights to 7 Bee Gees songs, and it'd be great if we could interweave these songs in some way. So it was an incredible straitjacket, but it was a simple brief. And one other song, I played the songs obviously over and over to try and see what story I might have. And there was a line in the 1st of May, a Bee Gees song, which is when we were small and Christmas trees were tall, we used to love while others used to play. And that was really the beginning of the love story of the whole idea of the film. And then, I was still quite young, so I wrote about my own experiences, really, growing up in Islington, interwoven with a few experiences of Putnam, whose original idea it was. But it was basically all based on my life in North London. And then Morris Hussain came along and instantly shot it all in South London, so it became quite irrelevant in that regard. But it's make-believe. It's a combination of Putnam's young life and my young life, really. I had no real experience in writing a screenplay, so before I was a copywriter in advertising, and that was my life, really. I didn't really want to be anything else, and I was quite happy being a copywriter. I was quite successful at it in advertising, and I didn't even know how to lay out a script. And Putnam gave me an example of another script. He said it's got to be laid out in a certain pattern and everything. And I really, truly got lucky that the very first thing that I'd written got made as a film, with no filmic ambitions before that. And I think that I had written a lot of TV commercials with kids in it, and so I was experienced in writing for kids. And I also I had 4 small children of my own at the time. So in a way, it was trying, as with all dialogue, really, you're trying to make it as truthful and as honest as possible, and not what grown-ups, adults think. I think I was still quite childlike when I wrote it, so hopefully it sounds quite authentic. Because in the end, it's quite an odd idea to try and make it be authentic and believable.
I've got to dance with her.
You're mad? What do you want to do that for? She'll only say buzz off or something. She's a bit stuck up, that one. All this girl nonsense is rubbish. Girls are a load of snotty-nosed little so-and-sos.
I remember probably it was the beginnings of me directing, really, was that I visited set maybe 2-3 times, not much. And, it's quite extraordinary to watch, my friend David Putnam become very skilled at being a producer, having never produced before. It's amazing how he learned on the job very quickly. But I remember that we did a sports day scene, and I had started to experiment directing myself in the basement of CDP, the agency where I worked, but not very much I hadn't done. And so Putnam said to me, why don't you take the second camera and do some second unit filming and on this sports day scene. And I said okay. So I think I was doing the long jump. That was my little cameo thing that I was doing. And then whilst Waris was directing the actual movie, the main scenes, but then I got a bit carried away by being a director. So more and more extras sort of came around doing my bit. And as I got more and more ambitious, and louder and louder. And then I think that Waris got a bit fed up with me, really, because I'd nicked the camera and then I'd taken all these extras, and now I was making too much noise. He couldn't even film. But Putnam always said that he watched this and he thought, this was the beginnings of me directing, because it probably was the very first time I ever said action and cut on a film set. I visited the set so rarely, so infrequently. I mean, I had another job. I was working in advertising, so I was busy doing that. And the thing about being the writer, as I soon discovered on any film, is that I had writers complain about me when I became a director. The writer's the first person you forget actually when you get on to make the film, because a writer can be very irritating. And I think I not that I would ever got in the way or anything, but I think they got on and made the movie without me. Is the truth. I'd written the screenplay, and some. Writers always say, you throw it over a wall and then they get on and make the movie, and they really don't want to see the writer. So I didn't really get a lot of advice from Waris, although I did watch him direct, and it was quite good to see somebody doing the job properly instead of just experimenting in the basement, which is where I'd been. But I wasn't really present at the film, I wrote it, threw it over the wall, and they made it. I really quite like, although I wrote it for Islington and North London, was the original screenplay, and then all the locations were chosen in South London. Obviously the production designer and everyone. There was a lot. There's some fantastic open spaces, for instance, to filming in South London, in Battersea and places. And I think it looks great, actually. I mean, from the point of view of capturing London. As I say, it wasn't the bit of London that I'd written it for, but actually it became, very authentic, really. I think that there's, I remember there's a scene which is Melody's song, Melody Fair, and I just said, we hear the song, and then we see her with her goldfish, and that she got, and Waris said, well, you can't just write that. I want to know every single shot. So I had to write every single shot for him of what she might be doing, because, that's what the script is meant to do. But the thing is that the film starts off a bit slowly, actually. And but once you get to the goldfish scene, it just takes off, and it has another dimension. It goes into another gear. And so Putnam always used to say to me in subsequent films, when I was writing scripts, he said, try and get to the goldfish a little bit quicker next time, which is a great advice on any film. And I remember when I did Mississippi Burning, you get to the goldfish in about the third frame, so because you've got the audience, that's the secret. You present your credentials of what the film might be.
That's more like it. We are a nice suntan, my boy.
When I first saw the film finished, it was an incredible thrill, to see your name, the first credit that I'd ever had, really, up there on that huge screen. I can't pretend that wasn't really a fantastic feeling. And I think that really, because I hadn't had ambitions to be in the film business, I was an advertising person, and I was still quite young, in my 20s. And because of it, I then suddenly, changed course, really. And I thought, well, I was kind of propelled into this film industry thing because the very first thing I did had got made and was quite liked. And then I thought to myself, well, maybe I should be in the film industry. So that's when I started to want to direct myself. And but to start with, I only did TV commercials before I did my first film, which was Bugsy Malone. Perhaps Bugsy Malone, which was my first feature film, does owe a lot to Melody in a way, in that it's obviously, it's strongly about children. I think that it came from the fact that, again, I had 4 small children of my own, and they were growing up, and there was very little films for them to see that was relevant to them, and that they could like, and so and I'd written a lot of scripts after writing Melody, which were again set in London, and it was a very poor, depressed period in the British film industry, so it was really hard to get your scripts made. And every script I wrote after Melody came back saying too parochial, which of course was their great strength because they were about the world that I knew. And so I was forced into writing about a world that I didn't really know, so I wrote Bugsy Malone. I hadn't even visited the United States at the time, so I wrote about films I'd seen in Islington at the local Odeon about gangsters and musicals, and I fused them together. And because I had small children of my own, and I had directed by that time quite a lot of TV commercials with kids, it seemed like a good thing to do. But that's the only real link with Melody. What Melody gave me as a writer was the courage to do it again. I would never have had that courage to begin with, but for David Putnam, really, who really pushed me into doing it. And it got made, and you think, oh, well, maybe we're quite good at this. I think the next 4 scripts that I made didn't get made, is the truth. But until I did Bugsy Malone, and then that was the beginning of my career as a writer and as a director, more importantly. I haven't seen it for a few years, no. It'd be odd because, I do feel somewhat of a dilettante in this, in that I only wrote it. It is my original story and my screenplay, but I really don't ever think of it as my film. It's Warris's film. I believe that all films are the director's films, and I was lucky enough to write it. And so when people do retrospectives of my films or anything, it's never included, and I never include it because it was an odd beginning for me, and it wasn't ultimately what I ended up doing, because I ended up doing my own movies. If I'd have perhaps just been a writer, then it would have been included, but I never really used to include it. And then when I saw it a few years ago, I was surprised at actually the quality of the film. It really is. It's beautifully photographed too by Peter Szyszycki, and it's a really sweet film. And I think that it's. Francis Coppola once said to me, the great American director, he said, it's the kind of films that you only make at the beginning of a career, because there's something quite naive about it, because undoubtedly David Putnam was a little bit naive, and I certainly was naive, but in a way there's something quite loving about that, because you're unafraid, because you don't know the difference. And so we did something that was kind of that we might not have done. We would have been a little bit jaded or jaundiced, or I don't know, a bit long in the tooth, to do something that is actually an incredibly sweet story. I sort of remember at the time David Putnam came into my office at Pinewood Studios, and he said, "You wouldn't believe this." He said, "I'm going to give you this." It was this leather-bound thing. He said, "It's the Japanese Oscar, because the film has been such a huge success there." I said, "Japanese Oscar?" So I used to have it was all in Japanese, and it's this leather thing, and I used to have it propped up on my desk for ages and ages, years. And then suddenly, many years later, a Japanese journalist came in, and I said, "What does it actually say?" And he said, "It says best press ad." It was nothing to do with the Oscar, but that's typically David Putnam. But it did really well there. I remember when I went with Bugsy Malone, I went to Japan with Jodie Foster to do all the publicity. And I remember picking up a magazine, and it said the number one American star, or number one movie star in Japan was Robert Redford. Number 2 was Barbara Streisand. And number 3 was Tracy Hyde, which is the little girl from Melody, which I thought was kind of extraordinary. But the film is always, it's amazing the effect it had on people in most bizarre way. I know that Wes Anderson has said, a few times, that his film Moonrise Kingdom is very much based, partly on Melody, and also partly on an old Truffaut film. But it had its effect, and lots of people have always wanted to remake it. And but I don't know. I don't know about remaking films. You really shouldn't do that. But when you look at it all those years ago, that you wrote something that you really had no idea what you were doing, it's amazing that it turned out as well as it did. the funny thing is, during the making of the film, David said to me, "Would you come down to the set?" They were filming by the side of the Thames, I always remember, to do an interview for the BBC, for the main film programme. It was the only film programme. And this producer, a guy called Barry Brown, his name was. And we did this interview, and the interview is pretty pathetic. It was our first interview ever that the two of us had done. And we were looking at our shoes, and we were just really, really bad, is the truth, and answering the questions. And then we did it, and then that evening at home, I remember I picked up the phone, and it said, "Alan, it's Barry Brown here again. Remember we did the interview today?" I said, "Oh, yes. He said, "Well, tell you the truth," he said. "You were fantastic. You were so good. Really, really good in your interview. But that David Putnam, he wasn't very good, was he?" So I said, "No, he wasn't, was he? No, he wasn't very good at all, no." He said, "Oh, he's a complete amateur, nowhere near as good as you." I said, No, it's very nice of you to say that. Thank you very much." And he said, "So what we're going to do is we're going to redo it again with not the two of you, but just you. Because he said, but could you do us a favour? Don't tell David Putnam." I said, "Oh, no, I wouldn't dream of it." I said, "When do you want me? When do you want?" And suddenly the Barry Brown voice turned into David Putnam's voice. He said, "You jerk." He didn't say jerk, it was a much worse word. He said, "Your first opportunity, your first movie and your first interview, and you sell your friends down the river." He said, "What kind of person are you?" That's the BBC Barry Brown story.